Bienvenue à tous pour cette 9e séance du SOCOSMA, le séminaire d'observation de la crise Covid-19 dans les sociétés du monde arabe. Welcome to all for this 9th edition of SOCOSMA, a webinar observing the COVID-19 crisis's repercussions on the societies of the Arab world. أهلا بكم في الحلقة التاسعة لويبينار سوكوسما سيمينار رصد تداعيات أزمة الكوفيد في مجتمعات العالم العربي. This is the 9th edition and 10 months of massive presence of the virus in our daily lives on a global scale. SOCOSMA is a webinar organized by the French network of research centers in humanities based in the Arab world and aims at producing knowledge and showcasing research on this total event. SOCOSMA was created at the initiative of CEFREPA, formerly known as CEFAS, a center specializing in the Arabian Peninsula and based in Kuwait City with antennas in Muscat and Abu Dhabi. It gathered Centre Jacques Berck in Rabat, Morocco, IRMC in Tunis, CEDEJ in Cairo, CEDEJ Khartoum, and IFPO in Beirut and Amman. This session brings us back a third time to the Arabian Peninsula with two guest speakers who will discuss religious discourse in the face of Corona in the Arabian Peninsula, Abdesalam Al-Rubaidi from Yemen and Laurent Bonnefoy from Muscat, Oman. This webinar will be recorded and placed on the SOCOSMA YouTube channel. In order to ask questions, please use the dedicated Zoom conversation window and your microphones will be opened by order of inscription. And I will now leave Philippe Petria to present our guests for today's session. Philippe, you're it.
Thank you, Frederic. Thank you, Laurent, and thank you, Abdel Salam. I'm quite excited to introduce our two speakers today in the name of the CEFREPA, which is the new name of the CEFAS, the Centre Français de Recherche pour la Péninsule Arabique. Laurent Bonnefoy is a specialist of Yemeni history and Yemen politics. He is now a researcher in Muscat for the CEFREPA, called CEFAS. And with Abdel Salam Al-Rubaidi, who is a lecturer at the University of Albeit in Yemen. There are some shared interest in political and religious discourses in Yemen, focusing on Yemen, but on the Arabian Peninsula. So I leave them the floor, and I'm quite excited to welcome them in the name of the CEFAS for this thrilling topic today of religious discourse in the time of COVID-19. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to actually share the floor with my my dear friend Abdel Salam. We've had numerous opportunities over the years to work together, and I'm really happy to establish a new bond through Zoom and through this seminar with him between Muscat and Sana'a. So the purpose of my talk is to give a kind of broad overview of the kind of discourse which has emerged over the last year or so amongst religious actors at large in the 7 countries of the Arabian Peninsula. It so happens that for long, these actors appeared to be central. They were central objects in a number of publications of researchers focusing on the peninsula. Over the last, so to speak, 3 decades, the number of publications which focused on either religious actors per se or Islamist ones, which are a segment of religious actors which can be defined as ones who willingly resort to religious discourse to justify their political stances. Well, these two segments were at the core of many publications. And yet what's rather puzzling is that basically ever since the fall Daesh. So over the last 3 or 4 years, we could say that they have lost their centrality, at least in the publications, at least in discourses or in seminars like the ones we are holding. This I consider is rather puzzling and should encourage us to sort of understand why. It's quite clear that it's been the case in Yemen, where publications dealing with Islamist parties, for instance, have sort of disappeared. It's also the case, I would say, in Saudi Arabia, where you have new issues linked to identity, culture, youth, which are quite clearly emerging within social sciences dealing with contemporary issues. So the comparatively lower interest for these religious actors does not mean that there is necessarily a change in the role that they play. It's just that there has been a change in the way they are constructed as an object by researchers. What I want to state here over the course of this short presentation is that the pandemic is in itself an interesting moment to actually assess and understand what has been changing in the relationship between religious actors and the state. I'm sorry, I had forgotten to share the PowerPoint. So the fact that there might be a decreasing academic interest for religion in the Arabian Peninsula is a point that I want to make and that I consider is rather relevant. And yet it does not mean that that the power or the role of religion in itself has changed. And yet, much like elsewhere across the globe, or also in the Arab world, as other sessions of Sokosma have shown, the pandemic has profoundly transformed societies and institutions in the region. As Mehdi Ayashi had highlighted during our first session on Oman, the institutions, public institutions, and particularly the state and the government have projected themselves as as having their policies shaped by science and technicity. And so they pushed forward a different kind of vocabulary, different forms of institutions, and also new forms of services which are rendered to the citizens and expatriates by the public institutions. Quite tellingly, this new discourse has led to what can be labeled a relegation of religious discourses. Of course, one could state that this is nothing really new, and that over the last few years, such a trend has been noticeable. For instance, in Saudi Arabia, where you have multiple examples of a kind of relegation of a number of institutions. One of them being the so-called mutawa, or the religious police, which the government and the rulers have tried to set aside. And yet, the urgency of the pandemic pushed forward such a trend in a very way in a number of instances. I would state that, for instance, the approval by religious authorities of the vaccines has dragged rather tremendously. For instance, the UAE received an approval by the official body that issues fatwa, while it had already vaccinated 1.5 million of its inhabitants, which is rather significant of a new kind of hierarchy, which is manifest in public discourses. The same thing goes for Saudi Arabia, where you had the Grand Mufti who declared that vaccines were a blessing, a ni'mah from God, more than 2 weeks after Mohammed bin Salman, whom you see on the picture, which I use for the PowerPoint, received his own vaccine. And these timelines, I think, are rather telling. In a similar way, the closure of mosques, with a notable exception of Yemen, and Abdel Salam will probably have the opportunity to actually stress the reasons why it's an exception, but the closure of mosques, which happened very early on in the process, often in mid-March, if not in late February, under certain conditions in Saudi Arabia. Well, this did not trigger any kind of massive resistance on the part of religious actors. And it actually showed that, quite tellingly, religion was no longer considered something as strictly essential. Or it became, at least when it was practiced collectively, a kind of social issue and a problem. As Frédéric Lagrange had mentioned during his talk a few months back on popular culture and on production on the internet, it was rather telling that for the first time in history, there was a kind of inversion where collective prayer, collective practice of religion in itself was a prerequisite to stopping the virus. It was no longer something which in itself could be considered as something positive. It was, by the majority of actors, seen as something which was problematic. And in itself, I would say this is rather counterintuitive and interesting. Evidently, like I said earlier, there's no reason to actually consider that these new discourses and new concerns in public policies have actually led to the marginalization of piety. Piety itself was never at stake in any kind of discourses, and you can see in different formulations, in different statements either made in the media or the social media, which emphasized the link between being a good Muslim or a good worshipper and health. What's interesting, apart from these broad statements, is that using my own position as a social scientist, we can try to define 3 different ideal types which have emerged over the last months, and which I see as rather telling of a number of dynamics which are at play. These dynamics invite us in a way to go also beyond what is probably the first impression when we are dealing with religious discourse in the Arabian Peninsula, and that is to consider that public institutions have such a grasp over social society that they are in the capacity to actually control all the discourses which emerge. Obviously, the first ideal type is the most massive. It is the one which emerged in defense and in support of health-oriented public policies across the board. And this highlights what can be considered as a rather impressive capacity by the state to control what is the actual output of religious discourse. As Badr al-Saif, a researcher who has worked on the discourse in Saudi Arabia, has highlighted, he states that this pandemic has created what he calls a subordinate role for religious actors. So examples of fatwa which support and endorse the policies which are health-oriented and the decision-making of the government are rather numerous. And this even came from actors which had a strictly religious orientation. One of them has been the هيئة للمعروف والنهي عن المنكر, which is the religious body of the religious police in Saudi Arabia, which launched a new campaign to support using religious vocabulary the fact that one should stay at home. And this has been considered, including by Badr al-Saif, as something which was rather telling of a new kind of role. At the same time, you had a number of debates which emerged and which were rather telling of the new orientations. One of them being the discussions regarding the fact that were the dead to be considered martyrs or not. There was a fatwa which was issued outside of the peninsula, which received a support within, which considered that health workers, if they were dying as in the course of their activity of COVID, should be considered as martyrs. And then you had Salafi discussions, which kind of tried to broaden this perception and considered that under certain circumstances there could be such a kind of labeling. Another issue which sort of structured the discourse within the peninsula has been the closure of mosques and the change of the adhan, so the call to prayer. This has been made quite systematic, the change of adhan, from early March, from mid-March, sorry, in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, and you had a change in the formulation. So, Hayya ala salah, so come to prayer has been changed through different formulations. I'm not sure that it's actually visible on the PowerPoint, but there was also debate as to what kind of labeling should be used. Was it to be a salah fi buyutikum, so in your home, or could there be a kind of formulation which was more religiously loaded, which would be fi rihalikum? And there, when it was used fi rihalikum, so in your place, there was explanations in numerous videos which were published as what it actually entailed. Another interesting moment was during Ramadan and the issue of whether it was actually permissible to pray at home, or whether it should be considered as a kind of obligation. So during the time across the countries, you had discourses which were issued by legitimate authorities, and so the example that I took is the one from the Mufti of Saudi Arabia, which considered that it was actually allowed to go and pray at home for the Eid prayer. What's interesting is that at no during that time, while endorsing the idea that it should not be a collective prayer, they never really used any kind of religiously loaded vocabulary. So it was never yajuz or la yajuz or haram, which are the usual keywords which are used in fatwa to actually legitimize something. But it was in a way a kind of secular or secularization discourse which emerged. The same goes for the Mufti of Oman, and we'll get back to his stances later, who published a kind of endorsement, which would be a civil endorsement of the positions which were defended by the authorities, by claiming that people should abide to the rules which were edicted by the Supreme Committee. And the second ideal type considers that a religious discourse could be mobilized to develop a very different form of position regarding the pandemic. the religious discourse could become a way to criticize either science in itself or the West, and consider that the pandemic should be seen as a godly response to a number of sins, or, and when I'm saying that would be critical of science, would consider that it was actually a creation by the West for different with different objectives, one of them being reducing fertility rates of Muslims. So Abdel Salam will have the opportunity, I think, to focus more on this type of discourse. The reason being that it is much more present, I think, in Yemen, in particular because the public authorities in Yemen, especially in the north of Yemen, have a different kind of stance than the ones which are in the monarchies. The authorities in Sana'a, in a way, do not abide by the rules of the international system, and they considered that the pandemic could be an opportunity to actually value a different kind of discourse. And yet, when you're looking at what could be seen as a radical critique or the use of religious discourse by a number of, so to speak, radical actors, I mean, blunt conspiracy theories were rather rare. And this is also quite telling. It's also quite telling that there was a near absence of millennialistic discourses. And this is a far move from what was dominant, for instance, regarding Syria only 5 years ago. And so when you're looking at discourses which were issued by Daesh, for instance, you understand that despite it might consider that the pandemic itself was the worst nightmare of the Crusaders, Aswa Kawabis Salibiyin, in fact, it still endorses the dominant approach, or the approach which focuses also on the added value of scientific discourse. So Daesh and Al-Qaeda in the peninsula issued guidelines that stress the necessity, for instance, to wash hands and maintain social distance. They also considered that due to the pandemic in Europe, fighters should not move from there or go there, which was rather telling of a kind of relegation, again, of what could be seen as a strictly religious discourse. An angle which was developed by a number of so-called jihadi groups for critique or for radical critique has been the closure of mosques. And so there they didn't abide by the rules. But what's interesting is that it was a discourse which was mainly pushed forward by actors external to the peninsula. The man which appears here on the PowerPoint, Abdullah Al-Muhaysani, is a Saudi cleric, and yet he's based in Syria. And this is probably what allowed him to publish such harsh critiques of the decisions which were taken by his own government. He stated that the closure of mosques were a mistake, and in a way they were symptomatic of what he describes as a materialistic interpretation of the reasons behind the spread of the pandemic. And he also stated that, for instance, Islamic jurisprudence had enough safeguards to actually prevent people who are sick from going to the mosque. And he used an example which is rather famous in Islamic jurisprudence regarding people who eat garlic or onion and who are not allowed to enter mosques because of this reason. The third type of discourse, the third ideal type, is probably one which is rather intermediate, which shows that while a certain number of actors who are within the peninsula and who represent a number of institutions actually endorsed public discourses which were health-oriented and which generated a number of closure of institutions or other phenomena. There ease when it came to their own relegation. And this has been manifest, I think, in the case of the Grand Mufti of Oman, so Ahmed al-Khalili, whom you see on the left, who published a video in March, who basically focused on matters of pure morality, and who gave a religious interpretation of what he calls so-called virus, which in a way contradicted most of the positions which were held by the government. And what's interesting is that at the beginning of this video, while he's a governmental figure and he's a very prominent figure, he stated that there had been a recording which was meant to be aired on television of his statements, but which never really was broadcast. So he claims that there had been a kind of censorship, and this generated a lot of debate within Omani society and on the social media. But what's interesting is that his own position appeared as rather marginal. When you look at the number of views of his own video, it's rather low, 90,000 views. And if you compare it to the kind of debate which emerged on social media because of his statements, I consider it to be indicative of a kind of marginality, which is rather telling. Another quite interesting figure is Tarata Soydan. So Tarata Soydan is a very prominent figure in Kuwait, which is at the crossroads of personal development and religious discourse. And so he published a video which you see, كيف نتعامل مع أزمة الكورونا, in which he states that he acknowledges that he's not a specialist of pandemics or of corona. So there he says that as a cleric, as someone who values religion, he must develop a discourse. And what's rather interesting is that over the course of the video, he mainly focuses on the effects of the pandemic on the economy, and much less actually on issues which are linked to morality or understanding why the pandemic has emerged, or what can Muslims actually do to actually lower its impact. These examples regarding a kind of unease when it comes to the kind of relegation can be put in perspective with another sequence which followed the massive support which occurred, I would say, during the spring and during most of the summer. And this is the sequence related to the calls to boycott French products. I think there probably is a kind of trade-off which occurred at the time, and this has been the case, I would say, in Kuwait, but it's also been more or less the case in Oman, where you had a kind of license which was given to a number of religious authorities, which had largely abided by the rules during the pandemic, and which were given a kind of allowance to develop discourses which clashed with the positions of the government. And I think that this probably was the case when it came to the boycott of French products. Such has been the interpretation which was given recently by a famous Omani journalist, who said that in a way the voices when it came to either the pandemic or the issue of the boycott of French products were to be heard. They needed to be maintained and preserved, because otherwise it would generate some kind of frustration within the general public. I will conclude now by just stating that this moment of the pandemic, this last year, I think is rather telling of a number of very profound dynamics, and one of them is probably the kind of secularization or the kind of apoliticism also of a number of institutions, which up to recently had the upper say when it came to a number of issues. What's interesting is that the kind of secularization here is channeled through what Frédéric often calls biopolitics here. And yet, and this probably contradicts what I've been saying by trying to sketch the main dynamics here. And yet, we must never forget that there are tremendous differences when it comes to one country, when it comes to the different cases. And I think this is probably the reason why it's very important to actually see and understand how the Yemeni case study, which will be presented by Abdel Salam, actually sheds light on the different ideotypes which I presented here, and maybe also contradicts them by having a different perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurent. Just after you stop sharing your screen, we will be hearing Abdel Salam. Excellent. So, Dr. Abdel Salam Al-Rubaidi, you can now speak. Thank you, Laurent.
Yes, thank you very much, Frederick. Thank you very much, Philippe. And I would like to thank my dear friend, Laurent. And I'm really happy that we are sharing today the lecture in this seminar. Laurent has spoken about he has given the map about the discourses in the Arab Peninsula, and Yemen is not far away from these discourses. Yemen is part of this, but there are some local features that we can speak about that the Yemeni religious and political landscape has. In Yemen, we have had two dominant discourses. One is about the question of whether the health care system in Yemen would be able to confront this pandemic, and whether the state, which is divided between the south and the north, and also parts of the state are in Marib, whether this divided state would be able to do something for the people. That was the question at the beginning of 2020. But there was also another dominant discourse, which is the religious discourse. The Yemeni society sometimes is described as a religious society. The religious leaders, sheikhs, muftis, they have contributed to the discussion. And they spoke about the ritualistic aspects during this pandemic, and also about the causes and about the messianic reasons for the pandemic. According to the Islamic jurisprudence, COVID-19 can be framed as a nazila, والنازلة هي الحدث, which is a novel case or something that emerged suddenly and that affect Muslim individuals or Muslim nations. And this nazila requires a fatwa or a legal opinion by the Muslim jurist, but not only by the Muslim jurist, but also by the specialist in that field. And in this context, we are talking about the epidemiologists and the physicians. However, this tradition was not followed by the religious leaders in the Arab world. We have seen many people, many muftis, sheikhs, they have been giving their opinions without consulting the specialist. For example, there are some funny cases. Ali Jum'ah, the Grand Mufti of Egypt, he links this pandemic to the 5G wireless technology, following some conspiracy theories even in the West. In Saudi Arabia, this presidency of the affairs of the two holy mosques asked people to drink Zamzam water. But there are some cases where some of the religious leaders have talking about the need for a new hermeneutics, a new interpretation of the Quran. Khalid al-Jundi is one of these people in Egypt. To confine my my talk here to Yemen, I would like to say that Yemen was not, the debate was not far away from these people are talking about these conspiracy theories about the legality of closing the closure of the Holy Mosque in Saudi Arabia. But what is particular in the Yemeni case is the politicization of the COVID-19, whether in, especially in the north, because of this exceptional situation where the Houthis, the de facto government is in war with the Arab coalition led by Saudi Arabia and with the international government. So at the beginning, the government of the Houthis denied any spread of COVID-19 in the regions of Yemen. They said we do not have this because Yemen is closed. And I remember that Nawal al-Maqhafi did a documentary film for BBC, and she showed how the authorities in Sana'a were very resistant to tell about what is going on. And the Minister of Health, Taha al-Mutawakkil, was saying we are taking the measures, everything is under control, and we do not have this COVID-19. But at the end of this year, maybe in August, he said that the medicine of COVID-19 will come from Yemen. That is after he realized that Yemen has no many cases of COVID-19. So we have to, as Laurent talked about these kind of discourses in Yemen, we have two discourses. One I call the plain religious discourse, which is taken from the text, from the scriptures. For example, Habib Abu Bakr al-Mashhur, he is a Sufi religious figure who lives in Aden, who leads Al-Aidarus Mosque. He said that the COVID-19 is one of the signs of the Day of Judgment, and it is coming in this period of human deterioration, al-ghutha. And according to him, the three pillars of religion, according to the Islamic scriptures, are not three, they are four. And he depended on a hadith that is Iman, Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. This is what everybody say. We have three: Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. But according to Habib Abu Bakr, he said, and alamat yawm al-qiyamah, the signs of the day of judgment, and we have to believe in them. And he, during the last 30 years, he have been publishing books about this apocalyptic predictions. COVID-19, according to him, also is a sign how the West and some other countries are making these troubles to humanity, and how God will abort these plans that are played by some wicked people, whether in the East or in the West, according to him. So he had a very famous a video where he talks about this, and he's denying, he's not talking about any scientific issues, and he said that God will help us in confronting this virus. Also, Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Majid al-Zindani, he is of Muslim Brotherhood background. He is from the Salafi trend inside the Yemeni Muslim Brotherhood. He said that he has a medicine for this, but until now we did not see this medicine. And he said that he derived this medicine from the prophetic tradition, from the al-Tibb al-Nabawi, the medical of Prophet, the medical tradition of Prophet Muhammad. And his sister, she is a sheikh, also Sheikha Aisha. She said that coronavirus is a Satan, and it enters into human being's body, and she is depending on some hadiths. So many of the Yemeni activists and social media users criticize Sheikh Muhammad and his sister, and they say they are following their fathers in claiming that they have medicines for such big diseases, but they do not have. For example, Ali Al-Hajuri, he is an actor, a comedian actor. He had series of videos criticizing a Zindani family, and he's labeling his videos as a battle for raising awareness. He himself was one day part in an Islah party. He was a preacher, but now he believes in the value of science, and also he is propagating a moderate Islamic discourse. So he also mocks Muhammad Nasr al-Hazmi, Sheikh Muhammad Nasr al-Hazmi, who said that God has punished China because they are oppressing Muslims there in China. Ali Al-Hajuri said, this comedian actor, this is a sheer ignorance of Al-Hazmi to say this. Coronavirus is a catastrophe and knows no race and no religion, and that all people must work in favor of humanity instead of this malicious joy. So from this plain religious framing of the virus that depends on some, literally on some verses from the Quran, that God punished some nations because they had sins, as Laurent said. They did not believe in him. So there are some verses and some hadiths about this, but whether they apply to the cases we have or not, that was part of the controversy. So we have another religious discourse, rationalized and politicized. One of the religious figures who his origins are from Yemen, Habib Ali Zain al-Abidin al-Jifri. He lives now between Egypt and the United Arab Emirates. He is supporting the policies somehow of United Arab Emirates and Egypt. So he is not on the line of Muslim brothers in Egypt. So in one of his lectures, he is criticizing those who say that this is a punishment of God against China. That was at the beginning of the pandemic. Al-Jifri said that this criticism of China, this propaganda is China, reminds us of what happened in 1980s when the United States, Saudi Arabia, and other countries the Salafis were encouraging people to go to Afghanistan to fight the communist Soviet Union. And he said, China is oppressing not only Muslims, but non-Muslims. God spoke about punishing some nations with with natural catastrophes, but we cannot say that what is going on now is of this kind of godly punishment. So Al-Jifri, he talks also in other videos about how to deal with this COVID-19, and he used some of the hadiths by Prophet Muhammad. So as everybody can take from the tradition. So Al-Jifri selected one hadith that says, stay at your home if there is a plague, don't go outside, be patient. If you die, then you have the award of being martyr. This is what he said, and he was asking people to use how to say, to be careful and to abide by the instructions of the government in social distancing. Away from Al-Jifri, we go back to Sana'a, to the Houthi figures who are mostly religious, who are well versed in Zaydi jurisprudence, starting from Abdul Malik al-Houthi to the Minister of Media, Minister of Information, Taifullah al-Shami, to the Minister of Health, Taha al-Mutawakkil, who is a preacher in one of the mosques of Sana'a, and a physician, and the Minister of Health. So Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the leader of the group, said that the closure of the Holy Mosque in Saudi Arabia is haram, is forbidden, and it is against the practices of Muslims for more than 1,000 years. We have had in history pandemics, plagues, but people did not. Muslims did not close the holy mosque, and they did not forbidden the Muslims from coming to Mecca during Hajj. And Al-Houthi thinks that the Saud house are not the eligible people, the qualified people to be in custody of the mosque of Mecca. And this is part of his discourse during the war. It's not the first time that he said that the Saud family, the Al Saud family, are not the ones who should be in the custody of the Holy Mosque. He said that in different occasions. Taifullah al-Shami, he said that it is the USA using biological infectious agent to fight its economic and ideological enemies, namely China and Iran. Also, Taha al-Mutawakkil, sometimes he asked people to abide by the instructions of social distances, cleaning their hands, and buying this so he in part of his discourse he was with this instructions, but also he's saying that God is keeping Yemen, especially Yemen, because there are people who are real believers and who are maintaining the tradition of Islam, and that's why Yemen is kept from this pandemic. And he said that the US is behind the spread of this virus, like what the United States did during in 2001, September 11. He said that the US can destroy every nation, even its own nation. So it is not surprising that there are people in America dying because of this pandemic. Akram al-Rugai, he is a traditionalist, Zaidi faqih, and a preacher, judge in the Grand Mosque of Sana'a. He said that God himself is punishing the West because they stopped our airports. God stopped their airports, and they also had these sanctions on us, and God uh, um, uh, um, on our children and women, and God hid their economy and imposed on them quarantine. So these statements reflect the ideological and political polarization at the local level in its connection to regional and international levels. The war in Yemen and the political climate in the whole region have impacted the very structural religious discourses on this issue. So coronavirus and the ways of confronting it in these discourses are not addressed in isolation of the existential questions of the main actors in Yemeni political and religious landscape. There are people who believe that in this contradiction of the religious discourses about this pandemic is a chance for an awakening force for the consciousness of those who still take the opinions of clerics on scientific issues seriously. However, given that Yemen is still now Yemen is closed, so some people believe that it is because we do not have now active airports that we do not have many cases. According to the last statistics, we have 2,000 people who did, but as I said at the beginning, there has been no transparency regarding this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you. I will be, as kind of always, taking the advantage that is given to me as hosting the presentation to ask you both a question about divine punishment. It's a point that was very interesting in Abdus Salam's talk. What is kind of surprising for me is the semi-absence of this important theme of pandemic seen as divine punishment in the mainstream discourses about God's poetic justice. It is because this is what was heard after the earthquake in Cairo in 1992. This is also what was heard after the tsunami in 2004. And when we come back in history and read accounts of the plague pandemics in the 14th century, and if you read the pages that Ibn Taghribardi was writing about the pandemics in the Middle Ages, it was about assigning the fault. What had we as Muslims done wrong so that we deserve what God is punishing us with? If this discourse is marginalized, as I understand, even in Yemen, has it been heard in the general public? Is it something that you have read about, heard about people perceiving the pandemic as poetic justice, as divine punishment, not against the Chinese or the Americans or the Europeans, but against us as Muslims, people wondering what did we do wrong to deserve what is happening to humanity as a whole and us in particular?
Yeah, thank you, Frederic. I think it's quite fascinating to see that it has not been central. It probably has been implicit in a number of statements, and I think that the example that I took of the Omani Mufti actually having a focus on issues of public morality and so on shows that it was an implicit stance, meaning that if you wanted to get away from this pandemic, of course you needed to abide by the rules focusing on health, but you also had to be a better Muslim. But what probably justifies the idea that it has not been central is that all in all, it did not start and did not primarily touch Muslim populations. Since it started well in China and then touched mainly European and North American countries, I think this generated a kind of stance or an appreciation which is very different. It's rather telling that in March when Daesh publishes its own commentary on the pandemic, it describes it as the worst nightmare of the Crusaders, which means that at the time they're implying that it will not concern Muslim dominated societies, so that they are in a way protected from it, which might have been seen in retrospect as a rather clumsy move when the pandemic has in effect touched and concerned all societies. But it probably explains why there was a feeling which went beyond, I think, religious actors. It was also present, I think, in the discourse of the states at least the monarchies, showing that they were also efficient in their own dealing with the pandemic, at least much more efficient than America or Europe. China was probably a different thing, but this was present in society, and being present in society at large, it was obviously also something which structured a religious discourse.
Thank you. Sarah Tunse is still with us, I think, so I am, you can open your mic and you can ask your question directly if you're here with us, Sarah.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, yes.
Thank you so much for this panel, I really appreciate it. I have two main questions. The first is about the funerals or the procedures of the dafn, the burial, and salat al-janaza, so funerary prayers, and if there was a special discourse on death, especially, and martyrdom with regards to the virus. Thank you so much.
So either Abdesalam or Laurent, any answer on the discourses concerning الدفن والجنازة?
Yes, there has been a debate about this among lay Muslims and clergymen, men, not only in the Arab world, but also in the West. In Yemen, for example, people were asking whether can we consider these people as martyrs or not, because the Muslim tradition in Islamic jurisprudence, there is a distinction between Shaheed al-Dunya wa Shaheed al-Akhirah wa Shaheed al-Dunya wal-Akhirah. There is three types of martyrs. So there are people, for example, those who are burned or dead under any deconstruction or in the sea, if they are drowned, they are considered to be martyrs, but not here in the hereafter. في الآخرة. So we deal with them during the burial as anyone else. So this is what some of the Yemeni scholars, religious scholars, say about the pandemic. We have to wash them even by some tools, or to have tayammum, which is to put a mud turab. One who has from the hospital, who is well equipped, well protected, can do this, and then we bury them. So these are some of the discussions that people had about this. I am sure that something happened also in France itself regarding this issue.
Abbas, I think you wanted to add something or ask another question which is linked to martyrdom. Do you want?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, and thank you, Laurent Abdesalam, for your talk. Yes, I wanted also to ask the same question regarding the status of martyr. So you answered Abdesalam, but I'm sure they are referring to medieval text. No, can you do you identify some discussions about this status, or all men of religion are agree with this status or not?
As I said before, in jurisprudence, Islamic jurisprudence, there is a distinction between Shaheed al-Dunya wal-Akhirah, the one who is killed in a battle against disbelievers, and this one we do not wash him or her. We do not put coffin on him or her. We just bury him or her. This is for these people who fight against non-Muslims in a battle that protect the Muslim nation, according to the traditional Islamic jurisprudence. But there are people who are considered to be shaheed. For example, the mother who is pregnant and died, the one who is drawn, or the al-hadma wal-gharqa wal-harqa. These people are all considered to be martyrs, but not in the they are not treated in this life as being martyrs. And we have this debate in Yemen, as I said, and the Mufti of Tarim, one of the Muftis in Tarim, he said that we deal with them according to the procedures imposed on us by the state. We use some tools for washing them, and we have to be careful when burying them. People are not supposed to attend during the funeral. So there has been a rationalization, and they have some framework of reference in the Islamic jurisprudence for this.
Thank you. So they can, according to some muftis, they are considered as martyrs.
In the aftermath, not here.
In the aftermath, of course, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
In the afterlife, yes, afterlife.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question will be from Marion Breteau. Marion, you can now switch on your mic.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Frederic, for giving me the possibility to talk. So actually, I had a question for Laurent, but maybe also Abdesalam can answer. So you were talking about these three types of discourses, and I had the impression these were rather institutional or mainstream. And I was wondering how the people, embody, adopt, or what are their attitudes towards these three types of discourses, and what are the tendencies that the people have towards the whole situation, also according to the vaccine. And also I had a small remark about the Great Mufti's video, which is really interesting in Oman. I have the impression that maybe the views were so few, maybe because the people forward such things on the social media most of the time, you know, and they might also, you know, cut the original video and share pieces only. So maybe that's why they don't go to the source, and which could be the reason why the views are few. Thank you.
Thank you. Regarding your last comment, I agree. I mean, it might have been cut. Now you had segments which were much more widely seen than what is suggested by YouTube. And your question regarding the attitude of the general public when it comes to either of these three stances, I would say it's quite difficult to actually understand what is the dominant view and what lay Omanis or lay Saudis think about what is happening. What is rather telling is that the field or the dominant religious field is now strictly controlled by institutions. It is obviously very difficult to have counter discourses which emerge. Apart from, and there might be a kind of counter example, which would be Kuwait. But I haven't been following it strictly, but I hear that there has been discourses within Kuwaiti parliament, which highlighted some kind of politicization, similar to what unfolded in Yemen. I saw comments being made by MPs close to the Muslim Brotherhood, which actually stigmatized Egypt for using the COVID as a way to actually stigmatize Egypt and the Sisi regime because of what it's been doing to the Muslim Brotherhood, rather than just for any kind of random reason. So this shows that there is some kind of space which exists. Regarding vaccines, one of the only comments which I saw was linked to the fact that vaccines themselves were using gelatin, and this was the object of different comments. But it was in a way whitewashed by the different fatwa which were published by the authorities. So I don't see any kind of very systematic resistance to the vaccines and to the policy which the different countries have been following. And there, you might, if you wanted to dig, and if I wanted to dig a bit deeper into this issue, I think that there clearly is a kind of temporality which has changed, and this is something which Frédéric had already highlighted. The main discourse happened during the first phase of the pandemic, and quite clearly, over the last months, there has been a sense that we were, or that societies in the region were sort of getting out of this long tunnel. And so all the debates which Abdel Salam also mentioned obviously happened in the first few weeks or first 3 months.
Thank you very much. The next question will be from Elise Tanquang. Elise, you can now open your mic.
Thanks a lot. I don't know if I managed to do it.
Yes, you are connected, Elise.
We can hear you.
You can hear me. Thank you. Sorry. Thanks a lot for your two presentations. I was interested more generally and in details in the relationship between the what I call the national task force that some countries set up to fight COVID, and those institutional religious institutions and or religious figures. I was wondering if there were some explicit collaborations between the two. So I don't know if every country set up such a task force. I mostly studied the one in Jordan, the epidemiological committee, but I guess I suppose that everyone did. So I was curious about knowing more about this. Thank you.
I personally have not been following this kind of collaboration. I mostly understood that there was this kind of hierarchy which was established with science being pushed forward and religion in a way relegated, which is what I see as probably the most telling phenomenon currently. But maybe Abdel Salam has other perspectives.
There has been a case in Yemen that is Tarim Directorate. It is a town in East Yemen, and it is one of the Shafi'i centers in the world. So Habib Omar bin Hafid, he is a Mufti in Tarim, not the main Mufti of Tarim. His brother is the main Mufti of Tarim. He was saying, people terrifying us, and he means the government with this COVID-19, God will protect us. And he was against terrifying people with this, and he said, we do not need to be afraid of this. But unfortunately, on April, his brother, the Grand Mufti of Tarim, died because of COVID-19 with some other people who were attending in one of the big mosques in Tarim. And the general director of this town was against the Mufti, against Habib Omar bin Hafid. He said, before this death of the Grand Mufti, we ask people not to attend to the mosques, not because we are against the mosques, not we are against the Sufis who have this celebrations, the Mawalid, extra. We are, so there was this discourse of the state by Khalid Huwaidi, who is the general director of Tarim, and the religious discourse by Umar bin Hafid. So that was at the beginning, but after that, bin Hafid himself, he became rational in his discourse. He's saying people should take care and should supplicate God, should follow the hygienic instructions in order to protect themselves, and God will protect us. This is exactly what he said. So there was some kind of clash between the discourse of the government and the religious people. But in Sana'a, they collaborate with each other because the people who are religious are ruling North Yemen, namely the Houthis.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Silvia Serrano from Sorbonne, Abu Dhabi. You can now open your mic.
Okay, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I have two small questions. Well, two. One is more an element of, let's say, discussion than really a question. I was very interested by what's said by Laurent about the relegation of the religion discourse. And I was just wondering how to interpret this relegation, whether it means that in the context of the crisis, or the crisis, let's say, highlights some evolution, development that were already here. And that is also to follow up with the question, I think that Manon asked the question before. It's difficult to understand what is the feeling inside the society. I understand that, but nevertheless, whether we can, this relegation can be interpreted as just shedding some light of a development and of a secularization of society, or just the crisis gives the possibility for the state and for state institution to have a stricter control over religious institutions. So that is my first question. And related to this question of secularization, in the presentation made by Laurent, I had the feeling, perhaps I'm not correct, and please tell me if I'm wrong about that. I had the feeling that you mentioned at the same time secularization and depolitization. And I had the feeling, in a sense, that it would be rather the opposite. If we are in society that are much more secularized that we can think, that means that the room for religion discourse is politicization. So I would not make an opposition between secularization and politicization, but rather both are coming together, I would say. So that's my first set of questions. And the second one is a very small question regarding what you mentioned about the vaccine and about the arguments against the vaccine, and about the fact that the Council of Fatwa, I think, I don't remember the accurate name, well, washed up any question regarding the conformity of the vaccine and decided that it is halal. But nevertheless, I am very interested about the discourse and the argument, as you mentioned that the only discussion was about gelatin. And I wonder if the argument was, okay, there is pork gelatin, but it's not a problem. Or yes, there was pork gelatin, it is a problem in general, but in this specific case, it is not a problem because there's something more important, or any kind of other argument to have the vaccine considered as halal. Thank you.
These are very broad questions. Let me just state that basically we have a lot of things, unraveling right in front of our eyes, and this has been the case over the last year, much more probably than before. So much of it is just food for thought, and I'd be very cautious when it comes to the different, labeling the different hypotheses that are unfolding. I think that it might, deliver a profound change when it comes to this kind of secularization which is happening, and I think this probably could be traced back even before the pandemic. A new kind of approach to religion. But again, it's very difficult to actually understand what people make of it. Are they really buying what the governments are pushing forward, or is it something which can trigger a number of reactions in the long term, where people will value much more the religious discourse, which they deem to be important. So I'm not actually confident enough to consider what will happen in the long run. Regarding the gelatin issue, the argument which was made was that since it was not eaten, it was something which was not an issue in itself. I don't know what to make of it when it comes to debates which exist within the ulama. I did not see any kind of a very prominent debate emerging, and one of the reasons might be also because things are happening so fast. So we might need to wait just a few months more to see if there's any kind of reaction. But I still think that over the last year or so, the relegation of public discourse has been something which has been very manifest.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurent. I think there will be a last question by Philippe Petria, and then we will have to let our speakers rest.
Thank you, Frederick, for giving me this privilege to ask the last question of our seminar. It's just a broad question, as the one mentioned by Sylvia and Laurent. To what extent is the stance of the actors you mentioned during your talk related to their official position? I mean, it seems that there is a kind of gap between people official with function in the governments or related to government muftis or people working for ministries with an official function, actually describing the COVID as not as a nazila, but something that can be dealt with, and that they have to support the government's efforts, and a gap between them and another group of people, which are actually opponents, or people contradicting or criticizing the government, criticizing the authorities in the north of Yemen. So I just would like to know if it was just not depending on their position toward the power or toward the states. So to what extent is the position or their stance toward the COVID related to their position toward the power?
It's a difficult question to actually. You're in a way asking if they were convinced or by what they were saying when it came to the pandemic. I still think that what's rather telling is that counter discourses. First of all, they probably did not emerge because there was no space for them, and this is something which is a characteristic, I would say, of the six monarchies, where it's quite evident that there almost is no space for any kind of counter discourse, just because even when it comes to the khutbah or whatever, it's still it has now become very centralized. That there's surveillance, etc. So this is probably the first reason. So no possibility to have a counter discourse. And then even when you add what might be other types, or what I call the second ideal type here, a kind of allegedly radical critique of the pandemic phase, be it because they criticize the decision making of the government, or because they consider that the pandemic itself is some kind of conspiracy, is that there is almost no kind of religious added value to it. You find that probably Trump supporters or certain supporters from the far right in Europe would have the same kind of positions as ones which were defended by Islamists or by Salafis. And what's rather telling of this kind of alleged counter discourse is that even for the most radical actors, they ended up having some kind of pro-science discourse which popped up, and that's why I used even the issue of Tarata Soydan, even though he's not himself a radical, but it was rather telling to see that he was meant to sort of develop a kind of religious discourse, and he ended up focusing on the economy. The same goes with Daesh. I mean, they're meant to focus on the pandemic as focusing on the Crusaders, and yet at the same time they would tell their own fighters to be cautious about it and not travel because it's a dangerous time. And so there's almost this kind of impossibility. And I think that there probably is something very specific with health matters with this pandemic, not having this space for any form of direct religious-based counter discourse. Yeah, Abdel Salam, if you had anything to say.
Can I also answer this question?
Yes, I would like to say something about the question of Sylvia regarding secularization. When we talk about, just to remind ourselves with some basics, that when we talk about secularization processes in the Arab or in the Muslim world, we are in different contexts from Europe. I know that everybody know this, but I think that the state in the Arab world emerged and developed in different way from the context in Europe and in different places in the world. The state, the modernist nation state, always co-opt the religious institutions in the Arab world. For example, in the United Arab Emirates nowadays, the khatibs, the muftis, they say what the government say, and they try to to justify the decisions of the government. This is one thing. The other thing is that fatwa in Islamic jurisprudence is not binding. When an individual mufti says something, it is a legal opinion, a mere legal opinion. As a lay Muslim, you can follow it, and you cannot. You can opt for not following this mufti. So a fatwa, by definition, is an opinion based on some evidence from the Quran, the Sunnah, or from the Qiyas or the consensus ijma'. But you can have, if you have the tools of thinking, of reading the scriptures, your own one. So the government sometimes, or the state, they can have their own muftis who can go hand with hand with the rationalization of the government itself. So, and the bureaucratic decisions of the government. And if we have, for example, in Yemen, a strong state, then we can see that the state is imposing its decision based on some religious justifications.
Thank you very much. I will thank again both Abdesalam and Laurent for this fascinating talk and extremely enriching session we had today. It was actually the first time we discussed in detail the religious discourse in the Arab world facing the corona crisis. We will be meeting again next month, and it should be from Cairo with perhaps the last session for the Sokosma seminar, which will be animated by Sidej. Thank you, everybody, for this excellent session again.